And that is my last post for the week. Nice. Alright, I think I'm done. I'm ready to take a...
This is Hero Quest, the fantasy adventure game where winning means mastering the arts of combat
I'll use my broadsword.
and magic.
Fire of Wrath.
Once you get into it, you'll never be the same. Hero Quest.
I'll use my broadsword.
What happens when you mix classic fantasy with modern design and sensibility? That's a question I wanted answered, and I think I've got it. Dungeon crawlers. There's a lot of them. And something I've noticed is that there's a very big gap between you need to know 50 pages worth of rules versus this game is literally made for babies. What I wanted to do, making Ruins of Roguewood, was make something that wasn't Gloomhaven, but also wasn't Hero Quest. What does that mean? We gotta find a middle ground. Something easy to learn, but with a lot of depth to it. I don't want to baby the player. I don't want the player to feel like they can only do one or two things a turn. I want there to be build depth. I want there to be unique kits. I want there to be a decent amount of variation to gameplay. I don't know. We'll figure it out. And how are we going to do that? Well, we'll look to the examples. Let's start from the bottom with a game called Karak. Karak, despite having a good presentation, suffers from its own simplicity. It tries to be as accessible as possible without really giving you your money's worth in terms of replayability or enjoyment through simple gameplay. As you can see, the components are pretty nice, and the box even comes with methods for sorting all these components, which you rarely see. I mean, check out the player boards. They have slots for everything: your health, the portrait of the character you're playing, and even the equipment items you have. The presentation and components are great. I mean, check out how easy these are to read. You have weapons and monsters here that fit perfectly into the slots and the board. The dice are even really cool too. Heck, when I go donate this game, I might even swap them out for some generic ones. In my opinion, the instructions are the best part. They're easy to read, and you can thumb through the whole book in about 10 minutes and understand exactly how to play start to finish. The actual gameplay. Well, monsters are simple numbers. Nothing more, nothing less. And you roll to attack, based off modifiers that your weapons give you that slot nicely into your inventory. Same goes for spells and other items. Biggest offense this game has is how the map is laid out. It's tiles, which could be done well, but there's no way of knowing what you're gonna run into next. The gameplay is completely random, thus making everything automated. You have no control. So the number one takeaway from Karak is simplicity and clarity. I want the game to look good and not be too hard to teach. But at the same time, I don't want to sacrifice gameplay. Moving on to a classic, Hero Quest. This is a big boy, and it was published way back in the 90s. Now, this game features a huge campaign and a huge box with a lot of components to go with it, including my own personal supplemental materials. There's plenty of supplemental literature to read through, including the main instruction book, the quest book, and a screen for the guy playing the evil wizard, running everything behind the table from the monsters to the traps. Crazy to think, despite the game's size, all the rules fit right here. The rules are notoriously simple to follow, but unlike many other games and our previous example, it's to this game's benefit. Now the real meat and potatoes, the quest book. This is only read by the dungeon master, the guy with the screen. and it tells him all the hidden information on the level, where to set up monsters, traps, treasure, and furniture as the players explore. I mean, it even comes with a monster reference and a means to make your own missions. Now, for simplicity's sake, every action in the game is dice-based. Your movement, you have to roll for it, which, surprisingly enough, actually works for this game. All the combat, offense, defense, monsters, and players alike is done via the symbols on these dice. Different symbols having different effects depending on your monster and weapon. Now, the other 95% of the weight of this game are the physical components. Tons of monsters and creatures, and they all look great based off their classic models from the original print of the game. The second sleeve features furniture, character sheets, and cards. Tons of decoration and, once again, supplemental materials that you can use to enhance the gameplay. Another thing, the game uses a large amount of cards. Once again, despite how much chunk this game has, it's very well known for its streamlining. First up, we've got the Artifact deck. This contains all kinds of story-related items. Then we have character cards featuring all their base values and some awesome portraits. This game has fantastic art, by the way. I don't know if you've noticed. And then we have the unnecessary, but still nice to have, reference cards for the players. Then we have 5 different types of spells, each of these being either elemental or chaos, with varying effects and degrees of usefulness depending on the situation. Of course, you can't have a dungeon crawler without tons of equipment items. Chainmail, crossbow, dagger, a lot of classics here, including the
My broadsword.
Anyway, we also have 8 or 9, I think, unique monster types here, and a ton of treasure for your party to loot as rewards for completing dungeons. Lastly, what many players would consider this game's greatest strength is the board. A multicolored grid, broken up into rooms, made to be easy to recognize and set up within moments of sitting down at the table. That's where the book comes in. Thanks to how simple and well laid out all the components and books are, sprawling dungeons that take up your entire table only take up a couple minutes to set up, at most. Overall, Hero Quest is a fantastic dungeon crawler introduction, if a little dated. One takeaway from Hero Quest is that I want to be accessible while still being fun, much unlike Karak. However, keeping down on bulk will certainly be a priority. Right, let's discuss a personal favorite of mine, Deck Box Dungeons. Now, I know this doesn't seem like a big game, but as soon as you pop it open and take a look at the components, you'll see why I like it so much. Everything in this game is fully fleshed out, but super tiny. Pulls no punches, having piles of dice, full-fledged instructions, reference cards, slick stat trackers that you slide under other cards, a variety of characters to play as, classes to apply to those individual characters for extra depth, a huge variety of weapons, a rather bulky treasure deck with a ton of different rewards and magical items, double-sided enemy cards featuring ranged and melee variations, and a ton of dungeon tiles. Here's a general approximation of a setup. You have all your items, your entire player inventory down below, with all the unique dungeon tiles you move through. Here, check out the deck. All the cards are double-sided. There's about 40 unique rooms to mix and match. To make things easier, each room tile has an ID that tells you how and where to connect it depending on what level you're playing. All the monsters in the game are actually represented by markers on their correlating dice, which are perfectly sized to fit right on the board, just like a miniature in any other game. Combat in this game is simple, yet even more effective than 2 previous games. You chuck dice based on your weapon, your defense, and your enemy. Your class card can further modify this. Depending on the character, you spend energy to cast spells or buff certain attacks that you have. The game uses a companion app that has a full campaign and a randomized roguelike mode. Best lesson I can learn from this game is to keep my scope in check while also balancing out variety. Alright, last example. Gloomhaven, Jaws of the Lion, and Gloomhaven in general. Fun fact, this game weighs as much as Hero Quest. Box is densely packed with a ton of components. You get a map of the town of Gloomhaven to mark off your adventures, and included stickers. Right on top is a board for your resources, a scenario book, and a supplemental scenario book. These are very important. We'll go over them later. This game also comes with an elegant quick start guide, featuring a list of all the components and how to set them up for your first mission. It's basically essential for something this dense. Next up, we have a learn to play guide and a glossary containing a dictionary of different rules. This game features a level of efficiency in rule telling and setup that you can really only find in modern games. Speaking of efficiency and elegance, let's talk about the scenario book. Not only does it tell you where to go and what missions to do, it gives you the map itself. This is what you play on. This is the dungeon. With enough space for all your miniatures, icons to tell you where to put things, and layouts and special rules right there on the board. Right off the top of the box, we get these nice little markers that help players track their energy and health. Something to note is the absolutely ridiculous amount of tokens and markers in this game. The same goes for all the monsters. 1 bag, 2 bags, 3 bags, 4 bags of monsters, just to give you an idea of the variety this campaign will put you through. Of course, don't forget the stands for the monsters and the decks that dictate their behavior, one of my favorite mechanics. Here we have some unique and very efficient trackers for the monster's health and energy. As you can see, they're all 4-sided, allowing the same monster to play at different difficulty levels depending on what side is showing. Of course, who could forget the envelopes used to hold each unique class's cards and abilities special to them and only them? Each class, as well as all their other material, gets a unique miniature to play with on the board. Take a peek inside the class envelope, which contains all the weapons, items, tools, and modifiers available to the class. Mechanic in Gloomhaven's arsenal are the modifier decks, which is something I'll actually be taking a lot of inspiration from. As mentioned before, the envelope also contains all the weapons and items that the player has available. This game gets pretty specific with that kind of thing, and it goes to show with how well balanced it is. Biggest takeaway from Gloomhaven, Jaws of the Lion? Bespoke mechanics. I'm trying to iterate on the wheel, not reinvent it, but that doesn't mean I can't have my own identity within this game. So, with all that out of the way, let's discuss the basics of Runes of Roguewood. This game is, obviously, a sequel, prequel, attachment to my previous single-player draw and draft game, Roguewood. The reason being, I thought it would be a cool fantasy setting to expand upon, as I have a pretty simple but goofy-looking art style that works with the game. There's not a lot of defining features to the world yet, so I can use this game to build off of that. And I haven't really dabbled in player character designs, seeing as the only character shown in the previous game was a dude in a cloak and hat who you could barely see. I have some old designs I'm gonna dig up so I can work with them, and perhaps do a little bit of mixing and matching with how things look. Oh yeah, perfect. Really want to update the monster designs, adding in much more unique additions. I'll use these designs to push certain elements of the story. Is there some kind of corruption going around? I'm also putting extra care into giving each monster their own identity, so that they're unique in combat. To reduce the game's size and components cost, I'm considering using multicolored dice. The dice's face will show the enemy's health, and a tracker cube correlating with the color can be put onto the card, so that you can keep track of them. It's no secret that I'm an absolute sucker for tile systems in games. I think it's a lot more efficient than having a big old board taking up the whole table. So I'm going to be using that here. There are a total of 15 tiles, 5 for each difficulty, each of them having a 3x3 grid with different placements for walls, chests, and monsters. Utilizing this grid system, I can use rules like line of sight and range of attack to make some really interesting combat scenarios with positioning and movement. All of my favorite dungeon crawlers use a grid system for combat. I love a good positioning and attack puzzle, and I really want to make this no exception to that rule. The game will feature multiple floors, having randomized, yet predetermined positionings for different tiles of the same difficulty. You'll have a basic idea of how hard the next room's going to be, but not the arrangement of the tile. Weapons, tools, and items that players find along the way will be carried in a hand of cards. This hand size is different depending on how many players are playing the game. Interesting part here is that players share a resource pool. Everyone draws from the same stack of arrows or wood to repair your shield. The weapons in this game will be simple to use but have decent utility, some featuring alt-fire modes. One example is an axe that you can swing all over the place for free, but if you want to throw it at an enemy, you have to spend wood. Out of combat, players treat entire tiles like single spaces. They can use items at any point once per their turn, and they can reveal tiles they're adjacent to and end their turn immediately. In combat, weapon cards dictate speed. You can use items as much as you want to create combo moves, and unexplored tiles are blocked off until every enemy is finished off. Now, the last thing I want to mention are the character designs for the players. I wanted to go for something a bit less Dungeons & Dragons and a bit more Robin Hood. Since the game is already so cartoony, why not do anthropomorphic creature designs? Really been trying to work with my style here to make some unique characters. Labrador Retriever Knight on a quest. A giant barbarian made of rocks. Explorer who happens to be a sentient bush person made up of bundles of plants. Or maybe, if you're so inclined, a big old grizzly bear Viking. Love to see Roguewood built out in the future as a setting that's a melting pot of all kinds of weird fantasy characters. Now, as you can see, I've got a lot of work to do and I'm really excited to continue to share it with y'all. Be sure to follow all my socials. I'm on Reddit now, but I don't really know what to post there yet. You'll see me at some point, probably. But, with all that being said, I hope you guys liked what I had to show off today. This next project's gonna be pretty cool. And while it's not gonna have the expected turnaround rate of something like Exfil that took me practically an entire year, I am hoping that this project will have the same amount of depth and replayability thanks to what I've learned through my previous projects. All kinds of ways to streamline my production process, how I create art, how I export things, even how I format my crazy spreadsheets and crunch numbers. It's all about simplicity, and I'm really excited to show you how that works in the near future. Alright everyone, you have a good day. That's all from me. Later.